In 2012, researchers at the Hospital for Sick Children in Toronto discovered why your earliest memories don't exist. The discovery overturned a century of assumptions about infant brain development. The problem, they found, is not that the infant brain is too immature to store memories. Infants learn at extraordinary rates. They form preferences, recognize faces, respond to their name, modify their behavior based on experience from the first days of life. Something is being encoded. But whatever is encoded does not survive into adulthood, and for most of the 20th century, no one had a satisfying explanation for why. The Toronto team found the mechanism, and the answer was not what anyone expected. You lived your first 3 years fully. You felt cold water on your skin for the first time. You learned faces, the ones that meant safety, the ones that meant danger. You felt joy before you had a word for it. You felt fear before you understood what fear was protecting you from. You experienced hunger and its resolution, pain and its end, the world arriving continuously with full intensity. You remember none of it. The reason is stranger than the fact. The phenomenon has a name: infantile amnesia. Adults cannot recall events from before roughly age 3 or 4. This is not individual variation. It is universal across cultures and languages and every population that has been studied. The earliest accessible memory sits at roughly the same boundary for almost everyone. For most of the 20th century, the explanation was developmental. The hippocampus, the structure most critical for encoding new episodic memories, is immature in early life, still undergoing the structural changes that won't complete for years. Without a mature hippocampus, the reasoning went, there is nowhere for memories to be written. The infant brain doesn't store them because it can't. The problem with this explanation is that it doesn't fit what the infant brain actually does. A newborn can recognize its mother's voice within hours of birth. Infants as young as 2 months show clear evidence of learning. They remember faces, modify their behavior in response to rewards, demonstrate preferences shaped by prior experience. The neural machinery for some kind of memory is clearly present and operational. Something is being recorded. The behavior proves it. Whatever is being recorded is just not being held in a form that survives into adulthood. And for decades, the field couldn't explain the gap. The question is not whether the infant brain encodes experience. It does. The question is what happens to what it encodes. Patricia Bauer at Emory University has spent decades tracing the boundary of childhood amnesia from the inside, following children forward in time rather than asking adults to reconstruct the past. In a study published in the journal Memory in 2014, Bauer and her colleagues recruited children and their mothers who had discussed distinctive, unique events when the children were 3 years old. Then they brought different subgroups of those children back, at ages 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9, and asked them to recall the specific events they had originally discussed with their mothers years earlier. The results were consistent across groups up to age 7. Children remembered 60% or more of the early life events. The memories were present, accessible, specific. Then, between ages 7 and 9, something shifted. Children in that window began to forget. Not gradually but steeply. By age 9, fewer than 40% of the same events were retrievable. The forgetting was not random. It was targeted. What disappeared first were the earliest memories, those from age 3 and below. More recent memories remained intact. The boundary moved forward in time as children aged, progressively erasing the earliest layer while preserving what came after. This is not infant amnesia as passive failure to encode. It is active forgetting, occurring years after the original events, in children old enough to have been remembering normally just months before. The brain does not simply fail to record the early years. Something returns to erase them. In 2012, Frankland and Sheena Josselyn at the Hospital for Sick Children in Toronto published a paper in the journal Learning and AMP Memory that proposed a mechanism for exactly this. The title was Infantile Amnesia, a Neurogenic Hypothesis. The hippocampus continues to generate new neurons throughout life, a process called adult neurogenesis. New cells are continuously produced in the dentate gyrus, a subregion of the hippocampus, and then integrated into existing circuits. This ongoing addition of new neurons is one of the ways the brain adapts. Each new cell brings new connection potential. Each integration alters the local pattern of activity. Frankland and Josselyn proposed that this integration is precisely what erases infant memories. When a new neuron integrates into an existing hippocampal circuit, it rewires that circuit. The synaptic connections that encoded a previous memory, the specific pattern of activation representing a particular experience, are disrupted by the new architecture. The original recording was made. The new wiring overwrote it. Infants generate hippocampal neurons at rates far higher than adults. The infant brain is not just learning. It is simultaneously reorganizing the tissue that learning is stored in. The result is a system that acquires experience rapidly and loses it just as rapidly, as each successive wave of neurogenesis continuously disrupts the circuits that stored what came before. But here's where it gets stranger. If the mechanism is physical, if new neurons physically disrupt existing circuits, then the implication is not that the memories were never stored. It is that the stored patterns were disrupted by subsequent architecture. The encoding happened. The new wiring interfered with retrieval. The original pattern may not have been erased. It may have been buried. Adult neurogenesis continues throughout life at lower rates. The process that ran at high speed during your infancy has slowed, but it has not stopped. Every day, new neurons are integrating into your hippocampus. Every day, at a slow and incremental rate, the circuits that encoded older memories are being gently disrupted. This is not only why you cannot access your earliest years. It is part of why old memories fade at all, why the vivid specificity of last year recedes into the blurred general outline of 5 years ago, and then into the thin residue of a decade past. The mechanism running at full speed during your infancy is still running, at a pace you don't notice, in tissue you can't feel changing. You are not the same neural architecture you were yesterday. Not dramatically, the changes are subtle, measured in individual neurons rather than wholesale restructuring. But the process that erased the first 3 years of your conscious life is not finished. It is present tense. It runs while you sleep. It runs while you are reading this. The infant memories didn't disappear into nothing. According to the neurogenic hypothesis, they were overwritten, buried under layers of subsequent architecture. They may be encoded somewhere in a pattern that the adult hippocampus can no longer reach. The recording was perfect. The playback disappeared. In 2018, Frankland and Josselyn's team published a paper in Current Biology that tested this implication directly. If infantile amnesia is caused by neurogenesis, if new neurons bury the circuits that stored infant memories, then suppressing neurogenesis after the fact should make those memories accessible again. The original encoding would still be there under the new architecture. Remove the disruption and you might be able to reach it. They tested this in mice. Mice exposed to specific experiences during infancy showed, as adults, no evidence of memory for those experiences, a standard laboratory model of infantile amnesia. Then the researchers suppressed hippocampal neurogenesis in those adult mice and tested them again. The infant memories became retrievable. The mice behaved as if they remembered with specificity, with detail, experiences from their earliest weeks of life. Memories that had appeared to be gone were not gone. They were inaccessible. And when the mechanism producing the inaccessibility was reversed, they returned. The memories were not erased. They were encrypted. The experiences from the first 3 years of your life are encoded in a pattern that the adult retrieval system cannot read. Not because the file is damaged, but because the file format changed. The brain that stored those experiences and the brain that now tries to retrieve them are not the same structure. The archive is intact. The index was overwritten. Everything you felt before you could name what you were feeling is still in there, somewhere, in a language you no longer speak, stored in circuits that have since been rebuilt around other things. What it means that those patterns still exist, whether they shape anything, whether they leave any trace in the person who can no longer find them, is a question the research has opened but not answered. Infantile amnesia is not a failure of the early brain. It is a structural consequence of the most intensive period of neural growth in the human lifespan. The very process that makes infancy the fastest period of learning in human life, explosive hippocampal neurogenesis, is the same process that ensures nothing from that period survives intact into adulthood. You cannot remember your first 3 years because your brain was too busy building itself to hold what it was recording. The memories went quiet, not because they were never there, because the system that would play them back was rebuilt before it could be used. But the question Frankland and Josselyn's research opens is not only backward-looking. If infant memories are encrypted rather than erased, if they are stored in a format the adult brain cannot read, then the events of the first 3 years did not simply vanish. They accumulated as structure, as pattern, as something that shaped the architecture that came after, even if the explicit record is inaccessible. What happened to you before you can remember may be the most consequential period of your life, and you cannot see it from the inside. The archive is intact. The index was overwritten. There is a set of structures in the brain that processes experience before it ever reaches the hippocampus, that assigns emotional weight, that flags what is threatening and what is safe, that runs faster than conscious thought. Those structures were fully operational during the years you cannot remember. What they encoded in that period, and how it shapes what you feel and fear and want now, is where this channel is going next.